Hey, it's Drybear. And today I'd like to target a very important question, one that shows up everywhere I look, and one that I see in all forms of media right now for Diablo 4, and that is, what should my progression strategy look like? How do I focus on making myself stronger while I'm leveling? What do I do to get into tier 3 and Nightmare and start doing endgame content? When should I look to replace my gear, and what should I do when I replace it? How should I look to go into tier 4 for Torment, as well as more endgame activities? And how do I make my build stronger as I go through all of these life stages for my character? So today I'm going to attempt to give you a high-level outline of how to progress your character from making it all the way until it's perfect and done and at the end of the game, in hopes that you walk away from this video with a firm, strong outline, a skeleton for how you progress through, and what you should do at each life stage. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me and the community, the next time you have to enter in a CAPTCHA for security, you're going to be doing it on your phone. And it's going to be one of those CAPTCHAs where you have to click on specific things, but your finger's too big to do it precisely. And so you're going to keep failing even though you know you're doing it right. All right, let's dive into character progression. And we'll start at a very high level so you know what goes on. There are 4 world tiers of difficulty that are available right now. When you first make a character, you will only have access to tier 1 adventurer and tier 2 veteran. Think of these as your leveling world difficulty. So I'm going to cluster tier 1 and tier 2 into a single tier because they're effectively the same. This is if you want to play a normal, fast speed run through the leveling experience, and veteran is if you want a harder challenge, though consecutively and colloquially, I would encourage everyone to play on tier 1. There isn't enough rewards to warrant tier 2. The only way I would encourage people to level on tier 2 is if you want a challenge. If you want it to be fun and you want to theorize and strategize boss fights while you're leveling, play on tier 2. But if you're on tier 2 and you're meeting any amount of contest while trying to do things, it will be slower leveling than if you were just leveling on tier 1. This is your first interaction with the game, is tier 1 and tier 2. Then there's going to be 2 end game difficulty levels that you'll want to progress through. When you reach level 45 to 50, most people will do this at level 50, you will complete a capstone dungeon, which is basically a graduation test. Can you graduate from the first tier 1 and tier 2 into the next tier? Completing this dungeon unlocks the next difficulty, Nightmare tier 3. Your items can then be upgraded into sacred tier items, and you'll get access to endgame activities. At level 70, which is the encouraged, but you can do it sooner, you'll unlock another capstone dungeon, which is your graduation test from tier 3. And you'll go into tier 4, which will unlock a new tier of quality for items and give you more endgame content and harder difficulty for the world that you're in. So I've put together a list of wisdoms and learnings on how to progress through each tier and what you should look for, because I see a lot of people that watch an endgame build guide and at level 20, they try to put it together. They don't have the legendaries, it doesn't work. And then they start struggling with the campaign. They're dying to bosses. They can't clear anything. They don't know what's going on. So if this is you, you're in the right place. I'm here to help. Let's look at your progression and your priorities for each tier of progress, and when you can look to move to the next tier, starting with your leveling tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. In tier 1 and tier 2, the primary gear you're looking for is yellow items. There are going to be legendary powers available. However, the process of extracting and imprinting legendaries onto items is expensive and can cost you a lot while you're leveling. There's also going to be a far greater strength value in having up-to-date yellow gear with the right stats on it than there is to be having all of these legendary powers. They're going to be outdated, right? If you're level 20 and you're still wearing level 8 gear, even though it has a legendary power on it, upgrading to level 20 gear is going to give you a far bigger increase. The only difference that the only caveat for this that I would tell you is if there is a legendary or 2 that you need for your leveling build. Some leveling builds require a specific aspect to function that work with the build. Then you want to put these on the rings and the amulet. The reason I recommend doing this is you can have very outdated rings and amulet and it will have the smallest impact on your overall strength because there's not main stats on there. It's primarily going to be end game scaling stats on your rings and amulet, which will have the smallest impact on your leveling output versus having just good gear, armor pieces, weapon, offhand, that sort of thing. So if there are legendary aspects that you need for your leveling build, put them on your rings and amulet. Every 15, 20 levels, you can upgrade that if you want, but it's not gonna be the end of the world if those become outdated. If you're leveling and you have a weapon that's 5 to 10 levels behind, that's gonna be a significant nerf to your character's damage output and efficacy, and it's gonna make the leveling experience far worse. So you don't really have to worry about complete builds while you're in tier 1 and tier 2. Just focus on getting the stat sheet values that you have as high as possible. So when you're looking at your character in game, you'll have a summary for attack power and armor. I think while you're leveling, it's perfectly fine to just use that as the end all be all. It's a little more complicated at end game because other stats that may have less impact on those summary values may have more output in your character overall. But while leveling, just say, hey, my attack power went up, I'm good to go. You can even swap between two-hand and one-handed weapons, put a two-hander on that might be higher level. Hey, my attack power went up, great, let's go, let's keep leveling. If I have a two-hander and I got a good offhand and a one-hand, and I put those on and my attack power went up, great, let's keep leveling. Don't overthink it, don't stop too much, just keep pushing. You wanna get to tier 3 as soon as possible because that's where you're gonna be investing in your character the most. So while leveling outside of rings and amulet, just focus on high item power. If it's higher, you can generally assume that it's better, and look for high weapon damage that affects your attack power. And replace your weapon as often as possible. You want to be looking to do this as soon as every 3 to 5 levels if you can, maybe 5 to 8 if it gets a little slow. If you need to, while you're doing world events and you're getting obols, you can roll specific weapons at the curiosities vendor in town. Roll for a two-hander or a one-hander. Roll it like 3 or 4 times. You should get at least 1 yellow. It might be better than the one you have. Put it on, attack power goes up. We're happy, we're moving, we're cruising. All of that is kind of your leveling strategy. If you find good aspects that have high rolls while leveling, throw them in your stash and hold on to them so that later on when you do the imprinting and making your build, you can imprint the high value aspects that you collect along the way onto your good gear in tier 3 and tier 4, which helps out tremendously, but you don't have to worry about getting legendaries while you're leveling. Boom, you hit level 45. Around 45 is when I would start looking to do the capstone dungeon. Most people are gonna do it closer to 50. The big thing about Diablo 4 is while your current level determines your strength. So at a very simple explanation, when you attack a monster, the difference in level scales how much damage you deal to them and how much damage they deal to you. So if something significantly outlevels you, you will do far less damage. It'll scale all of your damage down, and it'll scale all the damage they deal to you up. So every level you get does make your character stronger and makes it easier for you to do things. But if you have a good build and you're feeling confident, you can actually do the capstone dungeons before the level that's listed on the quest. Capstone 1, the first one says level 50. You can do it sooner if you want. And for tier 4, the capstone says level 70. You can do it sooner if you want. And I would say that on average, if you have a good build and you're paying attention, you're putting, you're putting a lot of effort into your character, you can start looking to do it at 45. But if you struggle at all, that's okay. You can push it towards the recommended level and get that done, and then you'll move into the next tier. So now that you have finished the capstone dungeon and you unlocked Nightmare tier 3, this is when your gearing gets serious because you can actually get some significantly better items from the items you got in tier 1 and tier 2, and some really awesome content unlocks. The first thing that I would do when I get into tier 3, before we look at all the end game stuff, is to go and do the Tree of Whispers, which is your global bounty system. You'll see it in the bottom right corner of the map. Go there, finish bounties, you'll see them on your map, complete them, and then you'll start collecting sigils that you can use to create nightmare dungeons, which is going to be your best source of gear. You also might get locked out of crafting sigils until you've done a couple nightmare dungeons. I believe you have to complete a nightmare dungeon tier 3 or level 3 before that system unlocks. So if that's locked for you, do world events like Legion events, Helltide, and your Tree of Whispers until you get enough sigils or sigil crafting materials. Do a couple sigils until you've completed level 3. Then you'll unlock that system and you're good to go. Now we're in tier 3 and our end game begins. What do we look to do? In tier 3, different from tier 1 and tier 2, is you now have access to sacred items. This isn't related to the rarity. Items can still be common, magic, which is blue, rare, which is yellow, legendary, which is orange, and unique, which is a nude kind of off orange color, which those are the rarities of the items. The aspect of normal, sacred, or ancestral just tells you what tier it is. And so if you have an exact copy of an item, if it exists in tier 1 and tier 2, it'll have no glow, no tier scaling, and it can go up to item, item power like 500, 600. Okay? If you get a copy of that item that has a sacred modifier on it, which means the top of the item glows gold, it can scale that item power up significantly to the mid to high 600s and even early 700s for strength. Same thing goes for tier 4. You'll get ancestral items, which will have a blue glow around them. Even if it's the exact same item, the same exact stats, if it's ancestral, it'll just be stronger, and that can scale well into the item power 800 and beyond to give you even more strength. So we want to rush to tier 3 and then start replacing all of your gear with sacred gear, because it's just simply going to be better. So get yellow gear. It's the exact same thing you did in tier 1 and tier 2. When you first started leveling, you're like, I need good powered items. I'm going to go find a bunch of yellows that have good stats and good power on them. I'm going to equip them, and then I'm going to start slowly putting power on them as I go. Tier 3, you can extract all your old aspects from tier 1 and tier 2, the legendaries that you had collected, and you can imprint them onto good sacred items. But the first thing you want to do is start getting sacred items by doing nightmare dungeons, world bosses, open events that can drop everywhere. You want to start getting good ones for that. You want to find good stats for your build. So have a general build in mind. I have plenty on my channel, and I'll be adding more every single week on endgame builds that will work. I'm going to finish up all my Necromancer builds and move on to other classes. So that is coming if you're looking for that. But find a build you want to work on, make one for yourself and use it as a guide, and then find stats that synergize with that and try to get those on your items. For item power, this is a little more complicated now because we're in tier 3. Say you have an item that's item power 700 and you have an item that's item power 680. The 680 may have perfect stats on it, and the 700 may have higher item power but poor stats. In that case, you want the 680 because the stats matter more. Unless it's a weapon, generally on weapons, item power matters more just because it gives you more of a scaling base value. But in general, I would recommend try to find sacred items that are in the range of 650 to 750. You'll find the best items that way. When you first hit tier 3, you'll probably be getting high 500s, low 600s, push nightmare dungeons, push world bosses, try to get closer to 650. Then you start re-rolling those and imprinting on those and getting those really good, because that will take you all the way through the end of tier 3. When you have a good yellow that has good stats on it, before you put an imprinted aspect on that item, I want you to go to the occultist and enchant it. Re-roll it while it's yellow. It'll cost far less gold. It'll cost far less resources and materials, and you'll know if you can re-roll a good stat on it before it starts getting too expensive. You might have to brick that item because it just can't re-roll. So re-roll the stats on the item while it's yellow. When you get a good stat on it, then imprint the aspect on it, and now you've got a really, really good legendary that costed you less to equip and to develop for the amount of gold and resources that it costs. And for your build, I also want you to identify which aspects, legendary powers, go on your amulet, or if you're going to use a one-hander or a two-hander. The reason for this is any legendary power that goes on your amulet is going to be increased by 50%. So you want to know which offensive power is going to be on your amulet, which one would give you the most value if it were to be scaled up above the other legendary powers. So choosing what goes on your amulet is very important. And for some builds, you might have to run main hand, offhand. Maybe you need cooldown reduction from your offhand. Maybe you need thorns from a shield for your build, or maybe you need certain attack speed values. Like maybe you have to run a one-hander because if your attack speed gets too slow, the build falls apart. So you have to run one-handers and an offhand, which is fine. Or maybe you have a build that needs more legendaries, right? Instead of having your 8 to 9 legendaries, maybe you need 9 to 10 to make the build work, and so you need more options for legendaries. So you would need to have a legendary power in your main hand and one in your offhand. But if you run a two-hander, since you're losing a legendary power, you can't have an offhand equipped. Any legendary power that goes on a two-hander gets doubled in value. Some builds benefit from this greatly because there might be one aspect that makes your build stronger than any other and is the most valuable. And if you double that, it becomes insanely strong, especially on builds that don't really need attack speed. So if you have a build that's relatively slow or very bursty, or you focus on things that don't rely on casting or attack speed, you might be able to just put a two-hander on, because then it'll just give you more stats and it'll give you a bigger scaling on that legendary power. So as you're putting your build together, decide what weapons you're going to use, what type of weapon as well. Each weapon type has a different set stat associated with it. Two-handed swords come with crit damage. Wands, one-handed wands, come with lucky hit chance. Some builds need lucky hit chance, so you need to use a wand. Maybe you need a specific focus. Maybe you need a shield. All of these things are considerations that you need to make. Then, as you're pushing through Nightmare Dungeons, you're doing world bosses, you're completing Helltide, you're doing all those activities. As you start pushing towards level 65, I would consider doing your capstone dungeon to go into tier 4. Same thing that we applied for tier 3. As you get to 65, consider doing it. If your character power isn't very strong yet, or your build is incomplete, you can look to do the capstone towards level 70. But around 65, I would say most people that have, they have good luck and they've put a lot of effort into their character, they should be able to do the capstone at level 65. Some people can even do it sooner if they've got really good gear. You can do that capstone at level 65. That will unlock the final tier in the game, tier 4 or Torment. This unlocks all the content in the game. You can then do Nightmare Dungeons above level 20, which is awesome. And then you can start doing crazy endgame content. And at this point, you can start heavily investing in your gear, because you know there's no tier 5, there's nothing replacing it. You're just going to keep getting better and better and fine-tuning everything that you have there. For the capstone dungeon, I would say a loose estimate is if you can complete a Nightmare Dungeon 15 and it's not all that hard for you, you can very easily do the capstone dungeon. So kind of push Nightmare Dungeons until you get to like 15, and then from there you can just go clear the capstone and you're good to go. You can also do capstone dungeons in groups or have someone come clear it for you, and there's no death restriction either. You can just keep doing it until you get it done. When you transition to tier 4, we're going to do the same thing again that we did before. We're going to look for yellow ancestral items with good stats, put them on, equip them, get our build, extract old aspects that we're not using, and then imprint those aspects onto our yellow our yellow rarity ancestral items that have the blue glow, and we'll start getting our legendaries put together again. Aim for item power 770 or higher. It's okay if it's like 730, 740, and as you're moving through and you push higher and higher. But again, if you have like a 680 item power item and you're holding on to it, even if it has perfect stats, try to look for something closer to 800 that you can replace it with as you start progressing through, because eventually you will outscale an item that has a restriction of that kind. Now that you're in tier 4, finish up whatever renown and leveling that you have, push towards level 100, finish out all your renown to get more of your Paragon points and max obols. Make sure you're doing one of each world boss each week. You get a special cache the first time you kill each world boss each week. So do Ashava, do Avarice, do the world big skeleton Doom Skeletor, and then make sure you have each one of those done. You can do them over more than once. You just won't get the cache each time, and they'll usually drop like one legendary, sometimes a unique, but they do take a while. I found that you can do each one time and then focus on Nightmare Dungeons or other content, and it's just fine. Make sure you're doing Helltide often. This is where you get the special resources that you need for re-rolling and enchanting your gear and upgrading your gear to the max level. You need lots of these. Helltide spawns every other hour. So if it's down, wait an hour, it should be back up. Go do it, clean it out. I have guides on Helltide if you're looking for that as well. Go to push as high Nightmare Dungeons as you can. The higher the Nightmare Dungeon goes, the harder it gets, but the better gear that drops, the better drop chances that you have, and the higher item power for the items will be, which unlocks some really cool opportunities for you. And lastly, you're doing Nightmare Dungeons because you want to level your glyphs. These give you insane value bonuses. One of your biggest bonuses comes from Paragon and your glyphs, so level these up. I would also recommend, people have asked me on glyph strategy, level glyphs, level one glyph at a time until you get to level 15, which gives that glyph the biggest radius possible inside of your Paragon board, which means you can get the passives much easier and make it stronger, and then level your next one. And then once you have all the glyphs that you need that you currently have on your Paragon board at level 15, then start leveling them up to 20. It takes longer, but you'll get some kind of nice stat bonuses from that. But level 15 is the target for your glyphs. So that is my attempt to give you a very simple outline for your progression from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 as you get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I hope this helps for people that are wondering what to do and what to look for, and gives you just some general to-dos and to-don'ts as you're progressing through the game. There's a lot of people are confused, and I'm hoping that this at least helps some of you out there. So that's what I got for you today. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below, leave a comment. The comments help the algorithm say, send this video to more people, which helps me out directly. And of course, if you have any other questions or concerns or comments, come hang out with me on my live stream. I'd be happy to chat with you there. Feel free to ask whatever you want. I'd love to talk about the game with you. Cheers. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.